everyone. Welcome back to Politico's AI Summit. I'm joined now by Casper Klinger, one of the leading voices in AI development in Europe. He's Vice President for European Government Affairs at Microsoft. Hello, Casper.
Hey, how are you, Nicholas?
Very well. Good to have you here today. I'm going to dive right into what we're talking about here, issue of concern for Microsoft. Just the other day, we saw the European Data Protection Supervisor saying he wanted to look into the use of Microsoft and cloud services, along with other companies. I want to ask you, is Europe becoming a bit of a hostile environment for companies like Microsoft?
I don't think it is, Nick, but what I would say is that I think it's only natural when we look at what has happened also in the last 14, 15, 16 months with, a global pandemic that has certainly raised a lot of challenges across Europe. We've seen the dependency on, the technology, including the technology we're using right now. And I think, when we have a situation where governments are struggling, we have higher unemployment, we have the economy contracting in most countries across Europe, and you combine that with the dependency on a lot of foreign technology, then I do think it's only natural that we do see some skepticisms or some concerns expressed in Europe about what I think is fundamentally, Europe's global competitiveness, looking not only into the next quarter, but in fact looking into the next decade. And then when you look at the European agenda that you know as well as I do, we have the European Commission now sometime into its mandate. We see a lot of regulations coming forward that are, in one way or the other, setting the guardrails around the technology that a company like Microsoft is involved in developing. Then it feels perhaps from the outside as though we're facing this enormous regulatory freight train that will make it a lot more difficult to operate in Europe. But I think it is a misunderstanding or a misconception that a company like Microsoft or many other of our colleagues or competitors that we are against regulation. In fact, I think most of the regulation that is coming forward is very much aligned with what we think is incredibly important, and that is to develop and deploy responsible technology that lives up to the highest standards, whether it's on human rights or privacy. So I do think that is a process that we'll find ourselves in. But in a more general way, whether we like it or not, for us as a company and for any other company who wants to operate in the European market, we have to align with the European vision and also the European regulatory and policy steps that are being taken in these years.
Yeah. That being said, Microsoft is a global company, depends on data flowing across the Atlantic back to the United States. The headquarters are over there. What is your sense of, we've had a big story today about NSA spying and that old chestnut coming up again. What is your view on the state of EU-US relations and the data question? Is there a lot of trust lost these days?
Yeah, I think this is really one of the key questions, Nick, and thanks for posing it. And I'll come clean from the beginning and saying I'm a pretty big believer in transatlantic relations, and my sort of cautious hope is also that we will see almost a renaissance of a strengthening of the transatlantic relationship after the Biden administration's arrival. We've had some difficult years. I think there's no reason to hide that. I think there is a degree of skepticism on both sides of the Atlantic. But I do think, as we're approaching in a couple of weeks, sort of the US-EU summit, where we'll have President Biden visiting Brussels and Europe, I think you can be a little bit cautiously optimistic that we'll see some progress in collaboration, not least on digital or technology issues. And, you might be asking a couple of questions around the AI proposal that came out of the European Commission a month ago. And what I really paid attention to was the reaction by the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who actually welcomed this proposal and said, we have a joint challenge in building trustworthy AI. And I don't recall any sentence or any statement like that in the previous 4 years. So I think there is a little bit of reason to be optimistic. And what I understand is that, when you look at a proposal like the Tech and Trade Council proposed by the European Union, let's be honest, perhaps a little bit of a lukewarm first look from the US side. But I think also on that agenda, I'm hearing positive steps forward. So I think data flows will continue to be absolutely essential, not only for US technology companies operating in Europe, but also for European content companies that are incredibly dependent on data flows. So let's also hope we'll find a solution on that soon.
Sure. Well, that's interesting. We'll follow up on the Trade and Tech Council, which has gone a bit quiet in the past couple months. Just before we're going to get into the AI rules, but I wanted to ask you, Microsoft is one of the companies that has committed to building some infrastructure here in Europe on storing data, processing some data here. Could you tell us a little bit about the rationale behind that? Are you responding to the tech sovereignty rhetoric here in Europe and saying, well, of course, there should be a measure of legal control over the data? And are you acknowledging that and kind of going with it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've launched sort of a mindset or campaign we call Tech Fit for Europe. And that's sort of our way of saying we have to align with the European agenda, Europe fit for the digital age. And we also have to align with some of the concerns that both customers and governments and European institutions are expressing, not least in the last couple of years. And you're right, Nick, in pointing out that the digital sovereignty discussion is certainly something that is noticed. And that I think ultimately we have to acknowledge that there are valid and legitimate reasons why Europeans are concerned about sovereignty, or if we boil it a bit more down, to be able to be in control in developing the regulatory framework to make sure that Europe decides what Europe wants to do. And I think the question of data residency or data localization, whatever you want to call it, is a topic that has also increased even in the last 14, 15 months during the global pandemic. Whether you're a customer, whether you're an enterprise in Europe, I think being more in control about your data flows, being more in control about where data is stored and where data is processed is an issue that we have to relate to. So as you indirectly mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, we took a step forward. We made an announcement about the creation of an EU data boundary, which is basically giving our customers in Europe the opportunity to not only store data in Europe, but also to process data in Europe. And the only reason we're able to do that is because of a quite significant investment in Europe in data centers. We have 14 data centers either in operations or in the process of being built. And I think that's a good example of the technology industry, in this case, Microsoft, really responding to some of the concerns we're seeing in Europe. And this probably won't disappear, Nick, would be my guess. So I think there are some difficult decisions to be made by all of us to make sure that we come across as really paying attention, but also aligning with the European agenda.
I want to get you back on the question of AI. We're at the AI Summit. Europe came out with its proposal for AI rules a couple weeks ago. Big news moment for us. I wanted to ask you, what does Microsoft want on AI rules? Now we have one set of rules coming out in Europe. You're a global company. Do you want at least a transatlantic framework? Do you want a global framework? And is this going to create more hassle for you to have to comply with one set in the EU, something else in the US, a third set of rules maybe in another location? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I guess the big question is whether the so-called Brussels effect will mean that the 107 pages long proposal that will have an impact elsewhere. But Nick, as you're alluding to, of course, having global rules or a global framework that we can respond to in some ways makes life easier. But I think the epicenter of many of these regulatory discussions are Europe and the European Union. And I don't think it's any surprise that Europe came forward with the AI proposal that we've been studying ever since its launch a few weeks ago. And what I would say is that most of what is in the proposal is something that we would completely align with and adhere to. I mean, there is a focus on high-risk areas, so areas where it's a question of huge impact on citizens of Europe with potentially very consequential outcomes. Those are areas that needs to be regulated. It also points out to a couple of areas where the use of AI is going to prohibit it. And I think that approach is very much aligned with what we've been doing internally. Also in Microsoft, we've set up an Office for Responsible AI that is helping us guide our own decision-making in these areas. I think the big question, just to be a little bit polemic here towards the end, Nick, is, of course, how do you make sure you strike the right balance in Europe? And, I'm a European, as you can tell by my accent. I'm unfortunately Dane, and I know you have some Swedish heritage, so my apologies for being Danish.
You're forgiven.
And I won't mention the ice hockey game last week at all. I'll just focus on the AI aspects of it. But what I would say is, I think for Europe, it is incredibly important, as even EVP Vestager has pointed out, that we do find the right balance to make sure that Europe will also be able to develop its ecosystem of AI and ML companies, that they will be able to scale, that you don't stifle the innovation in Europe. And I have taken notice that there's been a couple of voices around Europe where they've expressed some concerns about making sure that the new regulation won't go too far in that area. But fundamentally, what we see is something that we like, and something we want to help, being a constructive partner, and also sharing our internal expertise in the areas of machine learning and AI.
There you have it, folks. Microsoft in agreement with most of the AI rules. Not every line, though. Thank you so much, Kasper Klinge, Vice President for EU Government Affairs at Microsoft. Thanks for coming and chatting with us. Our next session is an exclusive transatlantic conversation on AI, named after our latest addition to Politico's newsletters, The Digital Bridge, authored by Mark Scott. Tune in for the next one. Thanks a lot, folks.